Hello and welcome to another virtual author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles, and today the Poison Pen is very lucky to have with us three New York Times best-selling authors, but conveniently for us and for you, they are all packaged in one person, Jane Ann Krentz, who is here with us today to talk about her latest Amanda Quick literary creation, When She Dreams. But before we begin our chat, I do want to let those listening in know that the Poison Pen was very fortunate to have secured some signed copies of When She Dreams. They're going like hotcakes. So if your dream is to own a copy of When She Dreams, and really who among us doesn't dream of that, you'll want to not dawdle, but either go online or give us a call right away to secure your copy. And now I'd like to welcome back virtually to the Poison Pen your favorite author and mine, Jane Ann Krentz.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here again.
We're delighted to have you back. Let's start with, I'm always fascinated by authors' origin stories, and I know you think yours is a little bit boring, but let's go ahead and tell us how Jane Ann Krentz started out before she was a writer.
You know, I really don't remember when I really wanted to write, but I do know that I got there by becoming a librarian first.
Okay.
That was my first career path. And as you and I have discussed, because you were in the biz, there are no ex-librarians. It's sort of like being a Marine, John. I mean, you are one for life. It's a calling. And I guess at the heart of that calling are books. The odd thing is, little known factoid, somewhere in my junior year in college, when I realized I had no defined career path and no career goals of any sort, and I had kept 3.5 years looking for inspiration and none had struck, I took a psych test, and the psych test was supposed to be a career guidance counseling thing, right? And so I spent, hours, half a day. It was a big, long test, all the yes, no, what do you like, and all that. And then I get the results, and they are absolutely useless because the result is you're going to be a writer or a librarian.
There you go.
It was so odd, and that's what I ended up being. I look back at that psych test, and I'm thinking, wow, but at the time I blew it off. I didn't think it was where I was. So so I did become a librarian because there was no money in writing in libraries, not a lot in library writing and
At least
librarianship, but you could pay the rent. And then there just came a point when I was reading a lot of fiction again, because I was out of school and I had that opportunity to read a lot of fiction again. And I just wanted to tell the story my way. And from that, the obsession struck.
And you got your writing career started in the 80s, 1980s, if I understand correctly.
Yeah,
and around...
that was a time of, you and I both remember, I think that was when the publishing world kind of woke up to the fact that there was a big audience for romance and romantic suspense.
Yeah.
It was an audience they'd pretty much ignored for years. And suddenly, once one publisher got into it, they all did.
Yeah. So you went ahead and got started. And what I found fascinating was that I think I read somewhere that you never set out when you started writing to write historical romantic suspense. You always thought you were going to write futuristic romantic suspense. So how did we come up with Amanda Quick?
Oh, through the process of killing off a career. I decided that the world needed futuristic romantic suspense.
Mm-hmm.
The world decided it did not need futuristic romantic suspense. And I was suddenly left with a terrible track record in terms of sales.
Oh.
Because the 3 books I wrote in that field just bombed and nobody was interested in publishing anymore under my name. So I needed a new career path and I needed a new name. And that was the first time I'd really looked at my core story and tried to figure out where I could take it. And I realized that at the heart of those 3 books that I had written in the futuristic setting was kind of a marriage of convenience or a partnership kind of story. Basically a buddy book, I guess you would say, with in that the hero and heroine have apparently nothing in common on the surface, opposites in many ways, but they're going to have to work together in order to survive and defeat the bad guys. And that enforces well, first of all, there's the proximity thing that comes into factor, but also the fact that they have to learn to trust each other. And I realize that as I look back on my career, the risk of trust is always in all of my books. It is always a theme at the heart of my books, because I think in the real world, we trust other people, we trust other things, we take that risk all the time, and it's the biggest risk we take.
Yeah. That adds to the tension and the drama in your stories because you don't know whether you're trusting the right person or not.
Yeah.
So you conquered historicals with your Amanda Quick. You started out in the Victorian era and then kind of Regency era, Victorian era. You've crept up into the 1930s with your Burning Cove books. And your latest one in that is When She Dreams. What can you tell us about that book?
Well, the move into the 1930s was another gamble career-wise, because there, as you and I have discussed, because you did some of the research for me on this, we could not locate a lot of romance or romantic suspense set in the 30s. What did we come up with? We came up with a lot of that pre-war mysteries.
Yeah, there were a lot of historical mysteries series.
Set in that period, but man, we did not find much romance or romantic suspense. So I, having learned my lesson a few years ago with the futuristics, I was a little hesitant. But at some point, in discussing it with my editor, I realized that the one thing I do enjoy writing the most is dialogue. The iconic movies of the 30s are so dialogue driven that most of us have a sense of it, even if we've never seen the whole movie. We can quote Casablanca, which granted was 42, but get the point.
An era.
Yeah, an era. And dialogue suits my style. That's the way I tell a story. So I decided to give it a whirl. And I thought, if this works, it's going to be because people will resonate with it because they've seen the movies, the 30s movies, enough to feel that they have a sense of that era. And I also knew it had to be West Coast, California, the golden, all the mythical California, the glamour.
And the sunshine, yeah.
Sunshine and glamour, yeah. That's what I was going for.
And in the latest book, you have your heroine who starts out by trying to hire a private eye.
Well, that, of course, gave me the instant. Everybody knows what the 1930s hard-boiled private eye looks like, right? And as soon as I had that in my head, I couldn't stop. I just kept running with it because it's such an iconic image, and everybody understands it. It's that wisecracking sleuth who's just kind of down but not quite out, and fundamentally a noble person underneath it all, and that fits my kind of male characters perfectly.
Well, you once the readers discover your hero is named Sam Sage, you can kind of think that you're seeing the direction you're going. And I want to say you do a very clever kind of homage to the 1930s, and it fits with your style because your protagonists in many ways are like those iconic couples, Nick and Nora Charles, or Sam Spade and the woman who done him wrong. I mean, you have that kind of relationship with your characters in your books.
I think you're right. I mean, I think that's why it felt, once I dove into it, it felt very natural. That the 1930s vibe felt very natural.
Now, your heroine, Maggie, is hiring the PI, Sam, because her boss, who in theory is on vacation, is being blackmailed.
Yes.
So,
and her boss, Aunt Cornelia, writes the Aunt Cornelia advice column. Mm-hmm. And in those days, well, still today, really, actually, every newspaper in the country ran an advice column. People have always loved advice columns. And so that makes for a great backdrop because you can write the column and be anonymous. The character who writes the column is not a person you're going to know on the street. So, and in fact, in reality, most advice columns went through several hands. One would write it and retire, and somebody else would take it over. And the audience never knew the difference because it was always, dear Aunt so-and-so. But the fact that she's covering for the heroine is covering for her boss who's on vacation.
Mhm.
And so the heroine's writing the advice columns right now. And that was a lot of fun to play with too, making up my own, asking for a friend questions.
Whether it was your conscious choice or whether subconsciously you channeled this, it really was a brilliant literary device, because I had no idea that these newspaper columns were so popular, starting in the 20s and going almost into the 60s and 70s. I think Dorothea Dix was one of the early advice columnists, and she was in the 1930s, 276 newspapers, and she reached 60 million readers. So yeah, it's like their version of the internet chat room or something. They're getting all those.
Well, and it also moved to television. Look at all those afternoon television shows where somebody comes on, they've messed up their life, they made huge mistakes, and everybody's going to fix them, right? I think audiences love to watch other people get told what to do, how to straighten out their lives. And maybe there's a sense of, well, I wouldn't have been that stupid or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right. Now, in addition to that, there's also that kind of hint of the supernatural that you like to throw into your stories. In this case, it's lucid dreaming and a conference that's taking place.
Yes, the whole lucid dreaming thing, well, it's very popular today, apparently. Apparently, if you go online, it's like all kinds of people telling you they can teach you how to accomplish lucid dreaming. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, you may or may not have experienced it, but it's not common, but it's not uncommon either. And it's that experience of dreaming, but knowing you're in the dream, that kind of semi-awake, but you're still in the dream. And the advantage of lucid dreaming, why everybody wants to do it if they can, is because theoretically, if you get good at it, you can control the dream. You can write the script because you're awake enough to do that. It's an unusual situation. Some people do it more than others, but it has a mystical sense to it. People get very excited about the whole idea. And in the 30s, it was being intensely researched as a way for two reasons. A lot of doctors thought it might be a way to treat mental illness, and others thought it was a way to tap into your psychic side, because it has a kind of a psychic vibe to it, a feel to it. So between those two approaches, people were just fascinated with it. And people were writing books on it and publishing papers on it and attending conferences.
Now I have to ask, this is kind of a segue, but did you see the new version of Nightmare Alley?
No.
Because I almost thought you were playing off that whole concept when you created this conference, because you have this hotel where this kind of Svengali almost that's convincing people that he can tap into their dreams, but behind the scenes, he's really being manipulated by a woman who pulling his strings. So I thought that was.
I will put that on my watch list. Thank you. I love that kind of stuff.
Well, I guess you were subconsciously once again channeling that vibe.
Well, it was just out there in the 30s. I mean, it was a major and seriously researched too. I mean, the whole dream thing was that was when Freud and Jung and others were, seriously investigating dreams as a way of reaching people's subconscious, unconscious mind, and maybe as a way of therapy. So.
One of the other things I love about all of your books, and it's present as part of your voice, I think, is your sense of humor. I don't think people recognize what you have, kind of this really dry sense of wit. And I'm going to paraphrase it. I may not get it exactly right, but I think you'll get the idea. At one point, your heroine is talking to the hero, the private eye, and the one of the advice columnists stand in, and she tells him that she doesn't need a hero to save her. She needs a man who can keep up with her. And I thought that's such a quintessential Jane Ann Prince heroine. Can you talk a little bit about what you think of when you're creating these female protagonists?
Well, since the core of the story revolves around issues of trust, one of the things that has to be implicit and explicit in the text at some point is the mutual respect between the characters. Because when you trust somebody else, it suggests a level of respect. And I, in the 30s, that's something in my mind, that's something a 30s woman would have said, because they were not being held back at all. I mean,
No.
they were moving forward. Things changed after World War II, but in the 30s, women were heading out into the world and moving fast. And there was even a term for it, fast women, which was not altogether complimentary, but
Probably not.
but I also like to. You've read the body of my work for years. We both know that I need that sense of respect between the two characters, and a sense that they're always different. They don't have the same strengths, but they do each have their own strengths, and each character recognizes that in the other. In one of the editors I had back a while back said that it's kind of a process of recognizing the hero in each other.
Oh.
And I thought that put it very well.
I can see that definitely. I think if I'm reading correctly, you're also, when you create your characters, you're interested in people who are reinventing themselves. Something has happened and now they're refashioning their life. Can you talk about why that appeals to you as a writer?
And also why I like Western settings, because that's a world where you can reinvent yourself. That's one of the reasons I've always written. All my books take place on Arizona, California, Oregon, and Seattle. There's a real pattern there. My characters tend to be entrepreneurial and in the process of reinvention. And I think that's because those are the kind of people in real life that I admire. Those are the people that attract me, that I find interesting, and their stories are interesting. And I think it's kind of a Western thing to admire people who are self-made. We don't judge a person, or we don't like to think we judge a person by 4 generations or 5 generations of family behind them that gave them a boost. It's the entrepreneur that reinvents the wheel kind of thing that grabs our attention. And that's always been the core of my characters. So they're either in the process of rebuilding a life, or they're in the process of trying to help somebody else do it and steer them, take care for them as they get through this complicated stage. Because every story needs that point of change. What's going to change? What's different at the end from the beginning? And reinventing yourself gives me something to work with. So, and I think it's something we end up, most of us, consciously or not, do it all our lives. I mean, we never do stand still when you think about it. We might think we're standing still, but in a process, but we're always changing. And I think if you're aware of that, you can take more control of the process. I guess it would be how I'd phrase it.
There's been a lot of talk over the years, especially recently, about authors' brands, which I think is really just a way of describing their writing style or their voice. Can you kind of let those listening in who may not be familiar with your books, and I know it's shocking to think there's people out there that might not, but there might be a few, how would you describe your writing voice? What kind of flavor are your books?
There's an underlying note of optimism in all of them. There is a sense that you can reinvent yourself, a belief in the power of being able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of thing. There's a fundamental sense of, I don't know, there's that underlying determination, or, you know, they used to call it grit.
Mhm.
You just keep putting one foot in front of the other until you get there, if that's what it takes. My characters are the kind who wouldn't want to get into a bar fight, but if you got into a bar fight, they'd have your back. I think, you know, at their kind of, when I think about it, they're all archetypes in a way of what most of us really want to be, or want to think we would be in the crunch, that we do the right thing, no matter what it took. And those are, I don't want people who are perfect or heroic in the traditional sense, but when the chips are down, they do the right thing. And somehow, you know, they're going to do the right thing. And I think that affirms what most people in their heart of hearts would like to think they would do, no matter how beaten up they were from life. They do the right thing when crunch time came. And so I think my characters kind of affirm a lot of people's core values. So if you like my books, you probably have the same core values. And also, as you just said, probably the same sense of humor.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I also think you have kind of, in a way, summarized the appeal of popular fiction versus literary fiction for many readers.
I agree. I agree.
Because in popular fiction, it's about these archetypes, these stories. Can you talk about how you perceive that?
I agree with you 100%. I think that's the appeal of popular fiction. I think it's why we're drawn back to it again and again. And because there is so much of it out there, we don't respect it, or the literary world perhaps doesn't respect it as much. But just the fact that there's a lot of it tells us that we need it. We wouldn't keep demanding more of it unless we wanted to see those values affirmed. So I think it's the driver of popular fiction. I think it has a strong cultural value in that it reaffirms from generation to generation and from year to year and from week to week, whatever, it reaffirms our core values as a culture. And those are things like, you know, a sense of honor, an underlying old-fashioned sense of honor, a sense of courage. We know it when we know what courage looks like. We know what honor looks like. We know what determination looks like. And a belief in the healing power of love. And I guess that's the underlying optimism that I was speaking of earlier. And those core elements, they don't just have an emotional appeal, they have a cultural value, because without them, the culture literally would fall apart. The center would not hold.
When She Dreams, is this your 6th in the Burning Codes series?
Yeah.
Six. So when you first decided you wanted to set a series, and we need to stop at this point because if you're not familiar with romantic suspense or romance or romantic thrillers, series are a little bit different. You create a world, but each book kind of stands on its own, so you don't have to worry about not having read books 1 through 5. You can pick up 6 and easily enter that world. But what prompted you to create Burning Cove? Is it modeled on a particular real place in California?
Yes, it's actually modeled on Santa Barbara. Don't tell Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara is this very lovely little, it was free, since its inception, it's been a playground for the Hollywood crowd and the glamorous and the people back east who want to experience the Southern California lifestyle and all that. And it's just this pretty little town with everything with white walls and red tile roofs, very Mediterranean looking, it was done in this, there were rules about what you could build in the town, and it had to abide by what was considered the Spanish colonial architectural style, which is a gorgeous style. and it's perfectly suited to a seaside setting in a sparkling Pacific Ocean. It's just this perfect little town. And so Burning Cove was my version of Santa Barbara. That way I could rearrange things,
Yeah.
put things where I needed them.
And it's close enough to Hollywood that they can get away for the weekend, but yet you can also bring in that crowd.
Yes, yes. And this was an era in which everybody literally was reinventing themselves, including the mobsters.
Oh,
They had been very active during the Prohibition, but then in 33, when Prohibition ended, the bottom fell out of the liquor smuggling market. And so they were looking for new things too. And gambling was the next big business model for that crowd. So that brings an interesting vibe to the area too.
Because it is part of the same world, I'm always fascinated by authors who create these kind of connected books. Do you find that because characters make appearances in and out of different books, do you keep like some notes so you get things correct? You just hope everything works out in the end? How do you keep things going in a series?
I've got some cheat sheets that are prepared at the end of every book by the publisher. The editorial side of things makes a lot of notes, and then I borrow. Mostly what I'm going to forget are names.
Oh.
Not characters so much, but the names I've used, because in the course of my rather extensive career, I've used every good name I could think of. And I'm constantly searching for good names. Anybody out there listening, if you want to leave some interesting names on my Facebook page, please feel free to drop by. I think I own half a dozen or a dozen name the baby books. Mm-hmm. But tip for those who are writing in an era, the Social Security Administration publishes a great list of most popular names by decade.
Oh.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool.
Because names are important. If you don't have the right name for a character, the story won't work.
I can't even get going on the character until I have a name for it. Isn't that funny? It's like naming an animal, I guess. Once you name the animal, now you can see it in a whole new light. Mm-hmm. First thing I do is slap a name on a character, even if it's not the one I keep. But I need that identification before I can start fleshing them out, figuring out what they're going to look, how they're going to move, what they're going to look like, what their problems are. Yeah. Names are an interesting study in and of themselves. The fact that we even need to do it. We could have just given ourselves numbers.
That's true. Well, in addition to names, I think sometimes a title can make or break a book too.
Yeah.
What kind of experiences have you had with titles? And because the Burning Cove series, they're really very, very complementary to the story inside.
Well, and with the 30s, I had something to work with, and between us, my editor, Cindy Wong, and I can usually come to some kind of a title that has that vibe, mm-hmm. 30s vibe. But it's an interesting situation when you think about it. The cover has to work with the title and has to send a snapshot. I guess I would say a little snapshot of the story, all in one 3-second thing that you have looking in a bookstore. It's an interesting art form, to tell you the truth, that it has to send such a message. And it's you working in a bookstore, what is it? They say 3 seconds?
I think it's 7, but even that is pretty limited. I mean, if it doesn't catch a reader's eye, it's not going anywhere.
Yeah. It's just, and I've had good covers, bad covers. I've had used covers. One of my first historical covers was actually a discarded cover from a more popular author at the time, a more successful author at the time. And but it was a historical cover for her. they decided not to use it on her book. They reinvented it for my book, but my book was a contemporary setting. That was probably the most mismatched cover. I cannot, however, compete with my friend Christina Dodd's notorious three-armed woman cover.
Yeah.
That's a classic.
Well, as some would say, and perhaps we'll touch upon this in a little bit, there are many areas where you can't compete with Christina Todd.
And she's got a new book coming out.
She does. Should we take a moment and talk about that?
Yeah. Point Last Seen.
Coming in July.
And it's an amnesia story. Everybody loves heroines with amnesia.
Well, what I thought was fascinating about Christina's upcoming book is it's set in a small town of Gothic. So we won't say she copied your West Coast settings, but it is a West Coast setting. And just to whet readers' interests, it opens with the hero on the beach. He's salvaging stuff because he uses it in the sculpture in addition to being a metal worker and a swordsmith. He sees what looks like a body in a black plastic bag. He assumes it's dead, drags it back into the beach. The woman does appear to be dead, but in one of those cinematic moments, after squeezing her, she gushes up a bunch of water and comes back to life. The heroine can only remember two things. She has amnesia, but she remembers her name might be Elle, and she's definitely sure someone was trying to kill her.
Yeah,
so
great.
That's Point Last Seen by Christina Dodd.
Great book.
Yeah, it's never too early to reserve copies. It's coming in July. And I always like to remind people that Christina Dodd is not just a social media platform phenomenon. She's also a writer.
I'm going to tell her you said that. Social media platform phenomenon. For those of you watching, John is teasing us about because I absolutely failed on TikTok, and Christina is, as John says, crushing it over on TikTok.
Do you have any other great suggestions for readers?
Yeah. Let me see what I've got here. You know, if this is a book that kind of is going to cross YA, I think the feel of it has a young, youthful sort of vibe to it. And that is Joss Walker's Master of Shadows, which is the second book in the series featuring a character named Jane Thorne, Jane with a Y, CIA librarian and magician. So that's
I didn't
coming
know
up.
the second one was out. Wow.
Well, it isn't. It's coming out this summer.
Okay.
Yeah, available.
And she's that's also J.T. Ellison.
Yes. I was going to say Joss Walker is the name, and she's writing with R.L. Perez in this book, but this is J.T. Ellison is underneath it all. And you and I both read this one.
Oh, I loved that. Scared me to death, but I loved it.
This book kind of made me realize just how much the supernatural has crept into psychological suspense. It used to be kind of hinted at, but you didn't really expect the real thing. But it's showing up now, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it was always part of that kind of almost the genre that no one claims to read, but is out there, horror. I mean,
Yes.
That was always an element, but now horror is kind of through Gothic, through romance, through other, it's making its way, I guess, seeping into other genres.
I think that's exactly what's happening. I agree. The book is the Book of Cold Cases by Simone
St.
St.
James.
James. So you and I both like that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I started reading it in the middle of the day. I finished it about 10 o'clock at night. There's, not to spoil too much, but there's a supernatural element to it. I turned out the lights. The house was all dark. I was going to sleep. I'm sitting there thinking, I'm going to turn the hall light on. And I turned the hall light on for a week because the book scared me.
This one would do that for you too. Yeah. This is again that kind of, this is Insomnia by Sarah Pinborough. Like I said, some of this stuff is quite new to me. That's why I'm kind of finding it intriguing and interested. I think I saw it first in Mexican Gothic couple years ago.
Mhm.
And now I'm just seeing it, as you say, it's horror coming into the Gothic novel is what,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm. What have you got on the,
Well, for fans of your 1930s books, I want to suggest Renee Patrick. It's a husband and wife writing team from your neck of woods. Their new book is Idle Gossip. It's a little bit later, 1940s, but it's Lillian Frost and Edith Head, the costume designer. So you've got the Hollywood element. This one's got a gossip columnist, murder. I love their books. They remind me a lot of your books and their sense of wit. Things like that.
yes, I've enjoyed them too.
And the other one I'll
And
mention,
I would just add that they often take a very interesting slice of history,
they do.
a pre-war lead up to the war history that was
Mhm.
happening in Hollywood. And didn't you tell me he had access to some of the archives,
Archives at one of the studios, I believe.
one of the
Yeah.
big Paramount or something? Yeah.
Yeah, they really do their research, and they're both like steeped in Hollywood from the 20s, I imagine, up into the 80s or 90s. So if your television is continually set to TCM, you definitely have to read Renee Patrick's books. The other one I'll mention real quickly is Bloomsbury Girls by Natalie Jenner. 1950s London. It's a bookshop that's being run by the men in the store, but the three women who work there have decided it's time for things to change. So they're kind of taking over. What I loved about the book, in addition to all the little stuff about books and authors and things like that, are the real historical figures that kind of make cameos. Ellen Doubleday, the wife of the Doubleday publisher, shows up. Peggy Guggenheim,
Oh,
the wife of the widow of George Orwell, and Daphne du Maurier makes a cameo turn. And what's interesting is the men have always done the programming at the bookstore, and the women want to do an event with Daphne, and they suggest an afternoon event, and that's totally foreign to the managers at the store, and they kind of have to push on it. But it turns out to be a great success because women readers can come to events during the days in the 1950s. At evening, they're at home taking care of everyone else. So if you love books, you love bookstores, you love London, 1950s, Bloomsbury Girls by Natalie Jenner. It's great.
the 1950s seem to be the next kind of hot era that's being discovered in, primarily, I think, in regard to women's books featuring
Yeah.
women of the time, characters of the time.
I think you're very perceptive once again, Jane, in that. But I always, when I see what's coming on PBS, that kind of clues me in. Okay, they're seeing something and they're pushing it. And they just started a series called Ridley Road on PBS, which is 1950s London, the rise of a fascist element there, and it's got a female protagonist. So yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, 1950s could be the next aspiring authors out there. That could be your clue.
I think it's just interesting that all the books we're talking about are kind of a retelling or a recasting or another look at history, at an era in history, but from a female point of view.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting. I wonder if it was Kristen Hanna's
Nightingale.
Nightingale that kind of tipped the balance into that kind of history telling.
Yeah, I think it's gradually. I think it started with that book probably and some others, but we're starting to realize that history is not just being told and done by men, but by women as well.
Yeah, and that leaves a lot of territory for our authors, especially aspiring new authors who are coming up looking for their own little turf, their own little niche market. This is not going to go away because women have always bought the majority of fiction books in this country anyway, and they're
as publishers of romance fiction have known since back in the 80s, other people mock them, but they laughed their way to the bank based on. So
I think it tends to be it's just another view of life during whatever era from another point of view, and we're always interested in how other people see the world.
Mhm.
Mostly because we don't understand how they could see it that way. It's like, what's wrong with them, you know? But it's a, maybe it's a spin-off from our interest in gossip, our interest in other people and who are different than us, you know, it's just kind of a human thing to have an interest. So seeing how the world looks to maybe from a child's point of view, or from a teenager's point of view, or from a woman's point of view, or a man's point of view, or LGBTQ point of view, just we're just fundamentally interested in that
Mhm.
and how they think.
We do have some questions from your many fans. So I'll start with the first one is, do you have a favorite book that you've written? And that's probably like asking what's your favorite child, but
I can tell you that the favorite book is always the one I just finished. Because there's still that I'm still riding that little high of the little rush of satisfaction that the story came together, and I'm satisfied with it. There's a sense of satisfaction that the book came together the way it was supposed to. But I'll forget that as soon as I start the next one, and then that will be the next favorite.
do you ever go back and reread your old books? See,
Never.
that's probably smart because you can't change anything. And
No, I have reissued some of them from time to time if I got the rights back, or the publisher will reissue some of the older ones. But I have, and some authors will go back and change them, update, like the technology particularly is a big thing. The book is what it is. It's of its time and place, and I'm not messing with it. So also I'm bored with it because I already told that story.
the next one we touched a little bit upon, but you might want to expand. This person asked, how do you come up with your titles? They especially liked the one-word titles you had from the 90s, which was like Mystique and all those.
Ravished. Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. I like the one-word titles too, but the problem with them is that they start to blend together.
Mm.
You get 10 one-word titles in a row, and
Mhm.
you no longer identify them with a particular story. So titles with more words are more, it's easier to invent a title with more words that will reflect a little snapshot of the story. Like When She Dreams,
Mhm.
you know, it tells you a lot about the story right there.
Or Close Up or Tightrope.
Yes, and those worked because they also send a very specific message. But if I had just used the word dreams on this one, that would have been too
Too vague.
vague. It would not have. There's no hook to it.
Yeah.
It's the word is too common, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, titles are also, for the most part, a collaborative effort between the author and their publisher and the marketing department. And just like in fashion and everything else, trends come and go.
Yes,
Titles.
titles are a marketing decision, just like covers.
Next one, who are your favorite connecting characters who have never gone on to their own books? So I guess if you've read something or maybe written something with characters but not continued them, do you have favorites?
You know, I started a series that was Regency, and it was a hero and heroine that I envisioned as ongoing sleuths. Is that what?
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. And she had a bit of a talent as a hypnotist, and his talent, they both had a psychic vibe, but it was very understated. And I got 3 books into it. I'm trying to remember the titles real quick. One was Don't Look Back.
Yeah. Mhm.
Late for the Wedding. Can't remember the third one. But the series didn't do well. I realized my problem with a series with continuing characters is that I don't know what to do with the relationship. Especially now, I wrap up the relationship in each book, and I don't want to have to go in and break it up.
Yeah.
And create a new problem and have them solve it all over again. That's not my kind of story. That's not my core story. So the Burning Cove series works for me because basically the town and a background cast of characters are the continuing elements. And then I bring a new couple to the fore with every book, and a new mystery. The continuing characters that I did not see coming in Burning Cove until maybe the second or third book really were Luther Pell and Raina Kirk.
Mhm.
And Luther is the owner of the hottest nightclub in town. He's got mob connections, but he also has US government clandestine spy connections. So he's kind of an interesting character. And in a way, I don't want to write too much about him because I want to keep him as a mystery.
Mhm.
And then Raina Kirk is his lover, and she runs the town's local investigation agency. So those characters have become kind of the anchor characters, I guess you would say,
Mhm.
for the Burning Cove books.
Who is your favorite bad guy that you've created and why? I guess your favorite villain from one of your books.
My favorite villain. I'm very fond of mad scientists.
Yes.
And there happens to be one in
When She Dreams.
When She Dreams, yeah. He's mad, but he's got a purpose. He's got a goal in life. He really is trying to control people's dreams, and he sees this as a very therapeutic thing to do, which was not out of sync with the thinking of the time, which was that if we could control dreams, we can heal various kinds of psychological disorders and stuff. So that's his goal, but he is a mad scientist. And we start off with him drugging the heroine so that he can hypnotize her into thinking the way he thinks she should dream. So hypnotize her into dreaming what he wants her to dream.
They're not mad, they're just misunderstood, I guess.
Yeah. They're legitimate researchers who've taken a step too far.
You really do a great job with your villains and antagonists. I still remember, I think it was the previous book, The Owner of the Spa.
Well, villains have their motives too.
You have to have them for action.
Yes. That's why I write romantic suspense. I was never good at straight up romance. If you look at everything I've ever written, there's always a mystery at the bottom part of it.
Yeah, that's true. Another person would like to know if the Burning Cove books became a TV show, and really PBS, if you're listening, this would be a perfect series.
I agree.
Who would you cast? Since they're each individual books, the new book, who would you cast as your hero or hero?
I don't know any of the modern actors. I just don't know them.
I'm trying to think of 1930s actors. Let's see. I could see Rosalind Russell being your.
Yeah, it's easier to go back to look at those characters, I think.
Cary Grant's too polished for your hero.
No, but he could be the Luther Pell kind of character. He could be the nightclub owner.
Humphrey Bogart's a little bit too rough around the edges.
Yeah, aging fast too.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's another thing about when I write the books, I never have a real person in mind for any of the characters. They really are products of my imagination and archetypes. Yeah. And I don't even do much description really, because I want people to make them look like what they want them to look like.
Another person, you've touched upon this, but you can expand if you'd like. Say your characters sound so real. Do you read your dialogue out loud when you're writing? Because you are dialogue driven.
No, I don't. But I think that's because dialogue is my natural voice. I hear the story in my head but that is a good tip for those who write. If you are struggling with dialogue, the tip to read it out loud is an excellent one. When you say it, you can often hear it sounding too stilted or too wordy or, whatever. So thank you for the tip I pass this along. But for me, the stories always unfold in terms of dialogue. For me, the hard part is description. I have to slow down and it's painful. There's some opening scenes there where I have to describe the mansion where the Lucid Dreaming event is taking place. And I don't even know how long it took me to get those few paragraphs of description pulled together. It's just not my forte. I think most writers do tend to fall in. Most writers find that one comes easier than the other. Yeah.
This one is anonymous, but I'm sure we can probably guess who sent it. They want to know if it's true that when you're in bookstores, you go around and put your book's face out and put other authors like Christina Dodd in the back.
Mostly Christina Dodd. I make sure my book is on top of Christina Dodd, because I just feel people should know that there's another author out there who is worth reading. And I have seen Christina do the same thing. So.
Another listener would like to know, do you have a typical writing day? What is your writing day like?
Yeah, I'm a fairly disciplined writer. I don't think the books would get done if I weren't.
Yeah.
So I'm a morning person. So most of my writing is going to take place like from 7 in the morning until 11, 12, something like that. After that, whatever creativity I have for the day is probably pretty well shot. And I'll be doing things like editing or research or shopping. Or there was more shopping before the pandemic. But
yeah, shut down.
Yeah. But most of my real writing will be morning, just because that's when I'm that's where my strong hours of the day are.
Do you, since the last couple of years have been unusual, do you see your publisher sending you out back on the road when things get more normal? Or
publishers are starting to do that. Yes, we'll see if they go back to it. You're going to see it before I do.
Yeah,
you're booking people, and I understand that's really perking up for you.
Yeah, it seems to be step by step. I think it's still kind of that transitional phase where people are not like, it's even when it comes to like workplaces, people aren't sure whether they're going back full time or part time, or it's going to be a learning curve.
Well, the problem for the authors is that it isn't just walking into the bookstore where everything is kind of in a controlled environment. It's getting there on the airplane, it's staying in the hotel, it's being in crowds. There's a lot of issues to it, unless it's just your local bookstore where you can literally just walk in. That would be a fairly comfortable situation, I think, now, but it's the travel component.
Before we run out of time, and we're rapidly approaching that point, can you tell us what's next for you as an author? I gather there's going to be more Dust Bunnies.
Yes. My Jane Castle world arrives again in September with a book called Sweetwater and the Witch. And for those who are familiar with my Amanda Quick world and my Jane Ann Krentz worlds and follow me around for a while, you'll recognize the name Sweetwater as a family of basically contract assassins, but they've reformed on Harmony, and they're now in the energy business. But sometimes they still do favors. And Sweetwater and the Witch comes out, I think, September 30th.
Wow.
Yeah, September 30th. Now, all of a sudden, we're looking at the start of summer, and
yeah, that's not far away.
Yeah.
And then there's another Jane Ann Krentz.
Yes, and then in January, which is my traditional month for the Jane Ann Krentz titles, Sleep No More.
Ooh.
And I keep getting it mixed up with with this title. I don't know what I was thinking. When she dreams, sleep no more. What was but Sleep No More is a Jane Ann Krentz contemporary title, and it's actually the starting book of what will be a kind of a trilogy.
You do like to do those.
Yeah, I think it's because I have such a long backlist now. The trilogies help people make a cut at it, it curate it a bit so they don't have to say, where should I start?
Mhm. And it might be too early to ask, but I'm hoping, can we hope for another Amanda Quick, Burning Cove?
Yes,
Great.
yes, yes. That career seems to have found its audience, which was what I hoped for. So thanks to all of you out there who gave it a try.
And PBS is still available for options.
And it's such an obvious thing. LA has all that old architecture. It's just
Yeah.
built there, I mean, it's easy filming.
Let's get Christina to do a TikTok video on it. That might prompt it.
Okay, all right.
Well, I want to thank you, Jane, for taking time to visit with us at the Poison Pen virtually with your new book, Amanda Quick's When She Dreams. Again, we do have a few signed copies left, so if you're interested, don't delay. Go online or give us a call. We'll be happy to send one to you or put one on hold. And I'd like to thank those for tuning in, and Jane, you for taking time to be with us again.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.